Hi, everyone. Welcome tonight, Saturday night. And we are here talking about managing screens and managing screen time and all of that kinds of challenging stuff. So I'm Dr. Chelsey Hauge, and this is my mom, Dr. Robin Hauge. We are a PhD mother-daughter team, and we run Positive Parenthood, which is relationship-based parenting. We offer courses and coaching for all different kinds of families. And tonight we are talking about screen time because we know how hot of an issue screen time is, and because so many of you have requested just sort of some help, some support around these issues that we face with screen time. So we're going to actually start off. By talking a little. Well, I'm going to share a little bit about what's going on in my own family. So, in addition to many of you having asked, you probably hear my dog licking up the water in the background. Sorry. In addition to the fact that many of you have asked about screen time, we recently had an experience that with my children. That made me think like, oh gosh, we really need to address this issue. So over the long weekend, so last weekend we went to Lake Tahoe with the extended family. So it's a trip that our family has been taking for like over 30 years. And on the way home, 3 daughters, 4.5-year-old twins, and a daughter who will be 3 like next week. So they all sit in a row together in a car, and my mom and I were sitting in the front seat, the 2 front seats, and my littlest one was like, my phone, I want my phone. She was talking about my phone, but she was calling it her phone. And my older 2 were watching a different show on my husband's phone. And it was a little intense. And this one turned to me and said, maybe you should quit screens cold turkey. And I was like, WTF. I use screens for many reasons. And I don't think I use that many screens, but I do use them sometimes. And it's also true upon reflection that over the last, I'd say 6 to 8 months, I've been working a lot more. I work from home, and so I have my own businesses. And so a lot of times I have the kids with me when I'm working, or I have like 1 zillion emails to respond to. And so sometimes I'll be like, I'll just put on 1 Paw Patrol and I will answer these 30 cajillion emails. Or in the morning, like I'm so exhausted, right? So I'll be like, I'll just let them watch 1 thing while I sleep for 20 more minutes. And it's just a really slippery slope. I do want to say it's a slope that is gendered and it is classed, and we have the utmost grace and respect and care for parents who need to rely on screens in order to get things done. And I just noticed for me that I certainly fall into that category. Childcare is so expensive, and it's gotten a little bit out of hand. So today or tonight, we're here to talk about what screen time is, what the research on screen time is, how to know when it's too much. So this is a thing that I've really been thinking about, like how do you know when it's too much screen time? And we're going to share a super specific technique about how to know. And then we're going to talk about what some of the best practices are and like how to move forward if you find yourself in a place where you're like, I need some help with this. So, Mom, maybe we can start off by talking to us a little bit about what we're talking about when we talk about screen time, because obviously kids have access to many different kinds of screens at this point in time.
Yeah, so I think that's an important thing to realize, that screen time is not just watching or playing on mom's phone, but it's also the television, it's also YouTube, it's movies, it's learning applications, it's FaceTiming, it's playing on an iPad, it's gaming. And I think it's really important to get a handle on, as Chelsey said, sometimes you start doing it for reasons of work and you're trying to get a few things done. And it becomes, as she said, a very slippery slope until you have a almost 3-year-old yelling that she wants my phone, talking about herself as if it's her personal phone. And I think that hit me as we were driving back, how significantly off that is for a 3-year-old to request a phone. And so I go back to, well, what does the research tell us? And certainly we know that schools spend time on learning on a screen. They learn how to type on the screen. They learn math games on the screen. Some kids, as they get older, have homework that you have to do on Google Docs. So there's a lot of things that can happen on a screen. And the funny thing is, there's an easy way to know. Chelsey mentioned earlier, how do you know when it's too much? And, if it's for homework or homework related, you're not going to fight with your child to get off the screen, because kids aren't going to sit there and do excessive amounts of homework. When they're done, they are done. And so relative to homework kinds of things, kids get on and off screens with ease. The place where it becomes difficult, excuse me, is when parents are using it, as Chelsey said, for, to fill in those moments while you're making dinner or finishing up some emails, when in reality your child needs your attention in that moment. So if in that moment you can move into co-viewing, excuse me, and what that means is that I'm going to watch alongside my child, that's going to give you a very different outcome than if you try to just let your child watch the screen. And an example I saw of that recently, we were flying back from Mexico, and I saw a mom and her teenage daughter with a shared iPad. Well, a little tickle here. And what I noticed is that the mom would play a game, and then the teenager would play the game, and they had about a minute and a half turns, and they were balancing what they were learning. So you talk for a minute.
Okay, so I can finish the story. So while she gets some water, sorry about that. So the mom and the teenager were on the airplane and playing a game together, and they were taking turns. So mom was looking at the screen and playing her turn, and then it would be teenager's turn. So they were uniquely engaged in the activity together. And actually what we know about how teenagers interact with each other on screens, and I my background is as an ethnographic researcher on teens and screens, and what we know about how young people engage each other on a screen is that they if they're in a physical space together, like say you got a bunch of teenagers at a football game, you might see one teenager holding the phone and many other teens clustered around the phone, so there's a social engagement aspect. And oftentimes as adults, we're like, oh, why are they on their phones? But really, they're doing social engagement. It's really similar to what the mom and the daughter were doing on the airplane, right? So they're sharing something, there's some communication about it, and they're playing something. So that kind of engagement is really pretty different, right? Than I need to make dinner, or I need to answer 1 zillion emails. And I'll just be honest about myself. Like I would say there's kind of 3 hot spot areas where we tend to use screens. The first one is in the morning when I first wake up and I'm like so tired because I stayed up working all night and like cleaning or like doing all the mom stuff. And so I just want to sleep for 10 more minutes. But one of my daughters especially, it's like the sun rises and she is awake and she's like, it's time to wake up. And she will stay quiet if I give her my phone. And she also knows that if I'm half asleep, she has a much higher likelihood of me saying yes to having my phone. So that's one time. It's like before 7 a.m. when I don't want to wake up. Another time that's a hot button time for us regarding screens is in the car. So in the car, oftentimes there, if it's like, especially if it's longer than 15 or so minutes, there's a lot of whining and crying. They don't want to be in the car. They wish we were getting somewhere faster, and it's easy to put screens on. And I also feel like, oh, this is the time when I could, like have some time to listen to some music or talk on the phone or like zone out however I want to zone out. And so that's another time that I use screens a lot. And then the third time, so both of those times I could probably pretty easily rectify, right? I could decide, okay, I'm just going to wake up when they're awake and I'm not going to use screens in the car. I actually have been doing screens only one direction. We've tried listening to podcasts and that's worked really well, but still a hot button time. And then the third time is the one that's a lot harder to deal with, right? Because the third time is when like I have some kind of work issue arise, or I have something that I really need to get done, and I have my kids and I don't have childcare. And so I just need them to be occupied for a minute so I can like finish up a call or answer some emails or draft something really quick or just like get something done. That's like when we're home, we're not like really out adventuring, we're just sort of home, and it feels like, oh, like maybe I could just get this done really fast. So that third time I think is the most, I think it's the most typical, and I also think it's the most challenging way that some of us use screens and leads to some of the bigger challenges. But before we get into those bigger challenges and how to know what is too much, maybe we can talk about what some of the research on screens is.
Yeah, so, the research would tell us to look at what happens as the child gets off the screen. So when I was watching on the airplane and I saw this teenage girl and her mom, they were back and forth with the screen, using it fluidly, having a conversation. There was no upset. But what we know about Chelsey's kids, and maybe your kids as well, is that when they get off the screen, they go into an upset. And what that signals to me is that the child's focus became too narrow. They were coming in and they were here, and they became very, very narrow. And so when you came to say, turn it off, the child exploded because this narrow focus that they were in was disturbed. And so our job is to think about if for the child, their focus is so intense and it's almost has an addictive quality for many of our children, because realize that most of the games, and this isn't true for some of the learning ones, but many of the applications and the screens, there's no end, right? You get to the end of Paw Patrol and up pops the next Paw Patrol. Or you get to the end of, your 3 lives and up pops the opportunity to start all over. So there's never truly an end to the game. And what happens is your child always wants to better his score or do something a little bit different or get just to this level. And so there's this feeling of pressure and anxiety on the child, which actually makes it difficult then for the child to zoom back to you as the parent. And so our job is to say, in that moment, the child's passivity, sitting there with that iPad, hyper-focused on a game, has taken him completely out of the social realm. And our job is to say, that is not good for his brain development, right? That's what the research tells me, because that child needs to be moving. We need to have his imagination. We need to be really thinking about how do we energize the brain, as opposed to how do I shut down the brain and just make it go blah. And what the research tells us about kids on screens when they're at this addictive sort of approach to it is that really their brain is in shutdown, which is why when you ask them to get off the phone or off the screen, you have the great big meltdown. And so I'm not saying you can't ever use a screen. So I appreciate some people say, I have to use a screen. Absolutely, we all use screens, right? But the question is, how do we support your child, your teenager, your younger child in how much screen time is good? Because you know that when there's a tantrum as the screen time is stopped, that was too much. That's your hint. Your child needed to be up physically and moving and getting around. So too much leads to that brain stoppage where the child then can't show flexibility and stability. Instead, I might think about, are there other things the child could be doing? Could he be outside playing ball? Could he be riding his bike? Could he be reading a book? All of those things stimulate the imagination, where a screen really shuts all of that down, and the child just becomes this sponge that's taking in information, but they're zoning out here. And certainly for one of Chelsey's 3 young children, there's one that you can't even talk to. She doesn't hear you if there's a screen on, which you don't think of. It happens so early. This little girl's only 4, but it happens.
Yeah, so it sounds like a couple of things. So the first thing is that the way to know that it's too much screen time has to do with the transition off of the device. Mm-hmm. Okay, so when I think about my own 3 kids, I have one child who most of the time I tell her like 1 more minute and then she is fine. She says, okay. And the minute happens and then she puts the screen down. So she like when we think about her in this kind of context, she would be okay.
She's okay.
Then I have another child who I say, no, 1 more minute, and then the minute ends and she starts to cry or she asks for the phone and calls it her phone. So she's not okay.
Mm-hmm.
Then I have the third child who I say, okay, 1 more minute. She doesn't even hear me. And then when it comes down to the minute and the minute is up, it's time to turn the screen off. She's very upset because she didn't even hear me say the 1 more minute.
Yeah. So you have to just recognize that each child is an individual and each child is different. And you know if you have an issue around screen time because you know what happens when you turn the screen off. So if you have a child that you say 1 more minute and the timer rings or however you set that minute and they come off the screen, that child's okay, right? And we know that each child is an individual, but when you have 3 in close age proximity, you have to think about how do I manage it for all 3, right? And so we have to say, without making a value judgment, we have to say for 2 of 3 of Chelsey's children, it is an issue. Screen time is an issue, and the current level of screen time is an issue. I want to go back and say I understand, the need sometimes to get something done. And Chelsey says she has an idea that she can do it in just a minute. And I think that reality of what is just a minute is a slippery slope, right? We sit down for just a minute, and now if I've got the favorite program on, I've forgotten that I have 3 children there in the background. They are occupied, right? They're not fighting because they're on the screen. And so I can step away, and that minute that Chelsey started with really could easily become 45 minutes or an hour or an hour and a half. And for some kids, like one and a half of Chelsey's, the longer they stay on the screen, the deeper they go into that, what I'm going to call a blue state of mind, right? Where it's really hard for us to pull the child back into social interaction. So we have to think about our individual children. We have to think about what happens when I come off the screen and go with the one that's having the most trouble. So if for Chelsey, if they watch more than 15 minutes at a time, we get into this hyper-focused mode on the screen, then maybe 15 minutes is too long. And so she's thinking, I'm going to take a minute. Maybe if she really did take 5 minutes or less, it would be okay. But when she takes a longer period, it's not. So
hold on for just a second. So it sounds like part of the issue is that say I have a lot of stuff to do. I'm going to put on one Paw Patrol. That's 15, I think it's 18 minutes, which then can easily slide sometimes into 2 Paw Patrols.
36 minutes.
Oh no, I forgot what I was going to say. So part of the issue is that I start to lose track of time. And so the kids get more and more immersed as I also get more and more immersed. And then when I come out of the immersion, things are really challenging. And so I'm wondering what you would say to folks who do need maybe just 15 minutes or 20 minutes or 30 minutes to get something done. Do you have any suggestions for how to for the adult to sort of modulate themselves so that kids can understand that the parent is coming back? Like, say you're not going to use a screen, say you're going to use Play-Doh or with a screen or like some other activity.
So I think, in all honesty, time just flies so fast, especially when you're doing a work-related task and we have, email and we have phone messages and text messages and Facebook and everything else to respond to. So I think you have to stay honest at this point. You have to come back to, let me set a timer for myself, right? So if I decide that I think my kids can handle 10 minutes on their own, hanging out with Play-Doh or playing outside in the water, or, if you decide it's a screen, whatever it is, then make sure it really is 10 minutes, right? Make sure it's 10 minutes, it's not 20. Make sure it's 15 minutes, it's not 30. Because what we want to know is that our kids need social engagement from us. And if we leave them for too long in front of the screen, they're going to lose that social engagement. For older kids, we also know that there's a tendency, for the teenage population, if I jump to that group of kiddos and screens, is there's a lot of social media right now. And some of our kids, it's easy on social media to say something that you would never say face to face, right? Because if you said it face to face, you'd have to deal with the reactions you got from your really hurtful words. So I think it's also important to be aware that as teenagers move away from parent and child interaction as their staple and move to peer-peer interactions as their staple, that we have to be really supportive of what is appropriate to send by social media, how much screen use is appropriate for a teenager, and that really becomes an individual family decision. And you have to decide, we've got these competing priorities. A competing priority is homework, whatever, extracurricular activities the child is in, and obviously, just their support of the home environment and chores that they might have as part of the family system. So I always say to families when they say how much, I say, come up with a number. Whatever number you want as a family, go for it. And let's just say that you've decided as a family that your child can have 4 hours over the weekend. So Friday afternoon to Sunday evening. What I don't want you as a parent to do is to say, you can have 30 minutes tonight and you monitor the clock as the parent. You can have an hour and a half tomorrow and you can have an hour and a half on Sunday. What we want to do instead is we want to offer the child the full, whatever the commitment is for the week. So maybe it's Friday, Saturday, Sunday is your timeline, and they get 3 hours for that time period. If they use their 3 hours up on Friday, we want to teach the child to self-monitor this by signing in and out somehow, whatever system you set up, and he uses it all up on Friday, then we want him to sit with the reality, and this is the important part, to sit with the reality that there are no more minutes for Saturday and Sunday. Because what we're teaching there is that if you really want to have extra time to do this on Sunday when you want to watch a special, basketball game or football game, then you need to make sure you didn't use all your minutes on Friday night or Saturday morning. So we're teaching the child to problem solve, we're teaching the child to modulate their own use of the screen, and we're teaching the child to be responsible. If you say it's 3 hours and then they come to you whining on Sunday morning that they need more time because they forgot about this assignment that they have to do, you have to stay strong and say, I'm sorry, our agreement is 3 hours and you've used your 3 hours. So we can't fold for any reason, right? Whether it's the all of a sudden deciding about homework, and I can say, it's okay, you can do that Monday morning, get up a half hour early, no biggie, right? But I want to teach that child to be responsible with his use of time on social media, because just like with us as adults, we get sucked in and we lose track of time, so do our kids. And I appreciate, we were recently in Tahoe and my sister and her husband went to the casinos and they left at 3:30, and at 9:30, and they told us they'd be back in 90 minutes. We were going to have dinner together. And at 9:30 p.m., 6 hours later, we sent out a search posse, right? Joking, to find one of the sons, and the wives went out to find him in the casinos, and they were sitting there happily playing along and had completely lost track of time. These are two adults with, typically very good use of time and knowledge of time. But it's the same thing that happened to him that happens to our kids, right? You get sucked in, you lose track. They didn't even realize that they missed dinner, that, normally my sister's in bed a lot earlier. She was still up, had no idea of the passage of time. And that's our job, is to really make kids become aware of that and to know that what's important is the social component, right? How do we drive that as the meaning that we want?
So at what age, would it be appropriate for me to institute something like that? At what age would you recommend deciding, okay, we have access to this amount of screen time, and once you've used it, it's up?
Really depends on who your child is. Some children can probably handle that information and work from that model when they're 8 to 10 years old. And some kids may not be able to really do that until they're 12 to 14. So, You have to decide on the maturity of your child. Can they modulate other things in their life? So if they get, a bag of a favorite treat, can they have some now and save some for later? How do they manage those kinds of things? Or do they want to just have everything they have in that moment? So when they start being able to sort of recognize that they can do some now and have some later, I want to absolutely put that into their hands. And it's okay with me if they fail, right? The first couple of times if they fail, meaning that they use up all their window of time early on, that's okay. The message there is, yep, you used it. I bet you had a great time, right? It's not shame on you for using it. It's like, yeah, that time is over now. And if they ask me again, I don't know, let's go check. Is your time up or do you have more time, right? So I'm not going to get into judge and jury on that, but I'm just going to nonchalantly go back to the chart where we're keeping track of it. If we've used our 30 minutes or we've used our 2 hours, whatever our time period is, then I have to say, oh, well, I guess we can't use any more till whatever the next do-over start time is.
So for those of us who have children who are younger than that, how would you help a child who's 4 or 5 or 6 or 7 manage that before they're sort of able to modulate that for themselves?
Yep. So I think that we have to sometimes back out entirely first. So we might say that we go off screens because it does have an addictive quality for kids. And, we might say we've been noticing as a family we're using too many screens. So we're going to put screens away and we're going to do other things to occupy our time. And remember that it's okay for kids to be bored, right? If they say they're bored, I know. I'm bored sometimes too, right? So we don't have to fill every moment with something to do. And that's really important. So for the little kids, or younger children, I would suggest a period of just going 100% off screens. And then I would invite back, I think we can have one time each week or whatever you decide, or 15 minutes each day, whatever your amount is. And your job is to do a little bit of time so that your child can easily get off. If you do too much time and your child gets stuck getting off, then you've crossed that border again and you've got to get back to the other side. And I might just say, you know what? I realize that even this much time is a little bit too tricky for us. So tomorrow we're going to try with just this tiny bit of time. I think that'll be okay. But if it's not, we might try again in 3 months, right? So as a parent, I can hold the boundary there for this child. I don't have to have the child, we don't have to make it in this moment. I'm going to hold the boundary and say, nope, that's not going to work, right? Because bottom line, we are the parents and we do have to look at what the research tells us, which isn't positive. And kids should not be on screens at all until they're over 2. And once they're 2, they should be on it very little because they really need to be moving. They need to be activating their brain. They need to be engaging with people, engaging their muscles. And none of that happens when they're on a screen.
So did I hear that right? That your suggestion is that people who feel like they've gotten a little bit more of a slippery slope, even if it's just maybe like not more than 60, sometimes 90 minutes a day, the kids are getting sort of scattered across the day. If you feel like that's too much, then your recommendation, or they're having a problem coming off the screens, the recommendation is to take a break from screens. For how long?
I would say to take a break for at least a month.
Okay, so let's talk about, hold on.
Wait, just give me one more minute. If your child is really stuck on screens and it's a major issue and you know who you are if you're this parent, then I would say it might be 6 months, right? So for Chelsey's kids, I think a 1 month reset is going to be enough to get them back into the realm of what reality is. But for some kids, a month isn't long enough. So really, it's about your individual child. It's about, you have to know your child. And will 1 month be enough to get him off that screen? Or does he need to have a complete break where he learns other ways to spend his leisure time?
Okay, so some of you who are listening know, and some of you have already put your hand in the air for possibly joining me on this, but we are planning on taking the month of March off of screens. And that's a pretty big undertaking because I work from home most of the time, and that just feels like a really, I mean, I feel like I could definitely reduce screens, but like going cold turkey off of screens seems like a really big undertaking. And so I'm wondering, yeah, just what are your thoughts about that?
Yeah, so you have to present it so our kids take our energy, right? So if I'm stressed about going off screens thinking, oh God, it's going to be crazy, I still have this work to do because I do work from home, I'm going to bring in sort of my own anxieties and my own upset, and I will quickly transfer that to my child. So you have to go into it with the, I got this. This is okay. We are going off screens. I'm okay with it. It's not a problem. I feel comfortable with it. I'm ready to go off screens. And I need to present to my child that, yeah, we are so lucky. We're going to be off screens for the next month, and we're going to just practice having fun together without screens. And so for Chelsey's early bird, the one that wakes up before 7, we might say, wow, when you get up that early, I'm going to have some books down at the end of the bed, and you can read a book. Or if you want, I'm going to have your special dolls right here, and you can play with a doll. So I want her to know that she's got some backup activities. And I also want Chelsey to know that it really won't hurt her if she gets up with Luna, right? It is okay to find a way to get yourself out of bed in the morning. So in these moments, I always tell families, you have to bring good energy to it. And if a child says, there's nothing wonderful and they're furious and they're upset, I have to stay curious, right? Like, what's really going on here? Why is this happening and why now, right? And when I think about it and I think about any upset that the child is having at any given moment, if I stay completely calm and well-regulated myself, my green energy will transition into that child. But if my green energy, and that's the calm that I want you to bring to a situation. So I think about it as a teeter-totter, right? One goes up and one goes down. So when I have a child that's elevated, I need the adult to be completely calm, because my energy is going to go into that child and help bring the child back down to me. But if my child is agitated up here and I start out green, but then I'm like, oh my God, she's been having tantrums all day, and soon I'm red with the child, then we're in a pattern of co-escalating red zone, screaming, tantruming, meaning I'm demonstrating to my child what she's demonstrating, and we're doing it together. And our job as parents is to try to teach our kids, yep, you can have that feeling. It's a big feeling, and it's going to pass, and it's okay. And I'm going to stay calm with you until you feel like you can come back and be okay in this moment.
Okay, so for families that are thinking of joining us for the month of March, No Screens Month, what would you recommend thinking about? So one thing for us, at least, would definitely be making sure that the child who wakes up really early in the morning has some stuff to do. And I'm sure that part of this is for parents to think about where the hot spots are, where you do use screens, and coming up with some alternatives and setting kids up. And what else would you recommend to people who are thinking about stopping screens for a month?
Well, I appreciate that. Some people are going to go in that direction, and I think it's so healthy for our kids. I would encourage the adults, as you can, and I recognize there's some barriers relative to work, but to try for the adults to model for the kids the no screen use, right? So that the adults as well put down their screens, and that we work on that family engagement. And take time just to be together, whether it's washing dishes together or cooking together or walking the dog together. So remember that if the parent is modeling screen use, kids want to do what their parents are doing. So just like, if a child sees you sweeping the floor and they're 3 or 4, they might want a child-sized broom so they can sweep with you. Or if you're washing the dishes, they want to wash the dishes with you because it looks like fun. And, as adults, we're like, oh my God, I hate washing dishes. But when I wash them with a 3 or 4-year-old, it's a lot more messy, right? So I'd rather just do it by myself. But what we need to do is we need to invite our kids into those spaces where they're doing household chores with us, and they're not seeing us nonstop monitoring our phone, right? And our own phone use is related to emails, it's related to text messages, it's related to instant messaging, all kinds of places that we get information. And it doesn't allow us to ever turn it off. And the same is true for kids. And as we know, one of the 3 of Chelsey's kids can manage that without a problem. But when your brain is constantly on some kind of screen, you lose your capacity to interact in a socially appropriate way. And so I'm trying to say, let's just all do it together as a family. We can sit down and have a family meeting and say, you know what, you guys, we've decided that we're going to take the month of March to have a whole month, 30 days of no screens. I am so excited. It's going to be fun. What kinds of things do we want to do instead of screens? And we can talk about that and make it fun. We can start playing games after dinner. We can play hide and seek after dinner. We can go walk the dog after dinner. We can go up to the dog park. All kinds of things you can do if you're not all addicted to a screen in that moment. And all of those things invite social interaction and movement, which is what will be really beneficial for your kiddos.
Great. So I have another question that's about just this tension, because something that we know about digital media and screens is that they're often cast as the reason for a lot of poor performance, poor relationships, poor behavior, negative things in the world and in society. And so there's a tension, I think, between saying, we're going to go off screens because screens are the problem, and doing that in a way that still might be tech forward, that fosters digital literacy skills, because it is also true that in our world, we want children to have a positive experience with screens and a positive experience with or positive capacities to navigate a lot of different social interactions, many of which will involve screens. And so I'm curious about what you think about that tension.
The tension is real, and I think there are no absolutes, and I hope that's what you're hearing from me. We have to find for each child and for each family system, where's the middle? And we have to find that middle, because we are all, as adults, we are all on screens, and our kids will absolutely be on screens. And so what I want to teach my child when they're able is that, gosh, I notice, when you watch a screen, it's like your brain gets stuck. Did you notice that your brain gets stuck and it gets very narrow and you can't even hear us when we're talking to you, right? Or when you watch screens and then the timer beeps and it's time to come off, it's really hard for you to get off a screen. So I want kids to learn that about themselves. And over time, I want them to learn how to regulate that. But in these early days with young children, so Chelsey has 3 that are 4 and down, it's too hard. They can't regulate it, right? They're babies themselves. And so at this point, as the parents, Chelsey and Sam have to support their kids in knowing where that edge is. And as the parents, they have to decide what's the right amount. For teenagers, when they start to get a little bit older, I want to support them in knowing themselves, right? So if I see that my teenager, who just got a new phone, spent 21 out of 24 hours on the phone and then is really tired and crabby the next day, I want to just daylight that and say, wow, I noticed you spent a lot of time on your phone yesterday. You probably only got this much sleep, and today you're kind of cranky. I wonder if that means that tomorrow or today, it would be better if you just played on your screen this much and you make sure you get to bed on time. So I'm not forcing the child to do it, this teenager to do anything yet, but I'm trying to teach her. Be aware of yourself, be aware of your profile, notice what happens in your body, because I want the teenager to learn to make the right choices. And we've been making, early on with kids, we make the choices for them, but as they move into 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, I want them to start using the information that we gave them to make the right choices to go forward.
Great. So this is the time for you to ask any questions. We've got a few minutes left. So I will just share a few things that are happening at Positive Parenthood. And while I do that, if you want to write any questions, it doesn't matter, yes or no. It doesn't matter if you are, which platform you're on, just type it in the comments and we'll make sure it gets answered. So as we do that, I want to say that we will be moving into, maybe you can respond to that question for a second. We'll be moving into the month of March, and in the month of March, me and my family will be having no screens, and I'm looking for 2 other families to join us. Now, if you are one of the 2 families that join us, a couple of things will happen. We'll invite you into, I'm just looking for some accountability partners. So I'll invite you to be an accountability partner. We'll probably meet with Robin once or twice. If you're somebody who has not ever taken the course and would like to, or we will give you a discounted rate at the course. So we would love to invite you for that. If that's of interest to you, then please reach out. You can send me a DM or you can shoot me an email at chelsey@positiveparenthood.org. I would love to hear from you. So that's one thing. The other thing is that next week our courses launch. So we have courses both for parents of little ones and parents for big kids and teens. And they run in Lafayette. They also run virtually, and we would love to have you join us. If you are going to join us and if you have listened to this workshop, please use the code workshop20 for a 20% discount on your tuition to a course or to coaching, whatever it is you decide to purchase. So
I have a question here, Chelsey.
Okay, great.
And it says, I have a question about our children being affected by us.
On our own screens. Mm-hmm.
Affected by us on our own screens. And so I think what this person is asking is, are our kids affected by watching us as we're on our screen, right? So if I'm supposed to be here interacting with Chelsey and I have this screen in front of me, our interaction is absolutely broken. So that's why I would encourage you to find a way to use your phone and then put it down, right? We want to model for our kids what we want them to learn. And remember, if we're modeling nonstop screen usage, they're going to use nonstop screens. And for some kids, that's not a big issue. And maybe for you as an adult, it's not a big issue. But for some kids, it's a very big issue. And so our job is to try to find where that middle ground is and model for our kids what we want to see for them.
Yeah, I also want to say that I think there's a real tension here because a lot of parents are trying to get their own needs and their own social emotional needs met by using their phones to connect with other moms or dads, to go on and check their Facebook groups where like people are engaging with what's going on for them. So for me, that's a question of like, okay, so what else can I do to get my own needs met? Like, do I just need to have a play day, or do I need to have a standing park encounter with some other adults so that I can get the kind of interaction that I need? Because I think it is really true that most of us are using screens because we're wanting some kind of engagement or some kind of interaction with people. And that's okay to want, and there's lots of ways to get it.
Mm-hmm. And I appreciate that. I think you're right. We have to find alternative ways to get that interaction so that we're doing it in face-to-face interactions, because that's where our kids are going to get their best learning as well.
So I don't see any other questions. So we're going to go ahead and wrap it up for tonight.
Thank you, everyone.
I also just want to say one more time that we're looking for 2 families that want to do no screens. They'll be supported by both of us for the month of March. So hopefully you'll join us for that. Shoot me a DM if you want to. And we have courses and coaches launching. If you would like to join those, also reach out, but you can use the code workshop20 at checkout to get a 20% discount. Thank you so much for everything. We look forward to working with you.
All right. Take care.
Bye-bye.